Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar covering the topic of financial literacy. I'm your host, Jay Dong from BCT Partners. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing support from HUD's Office of Innovation that made this webinar series possible, and also our friends and colleagues at First Pick who have been doing a fantastic job promoting the series and helping us all stay connected. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for taking time away from your busy schedule to participate in today's webinar. Next, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. During today's session, we will ask you to use the chat box at the bottom right corner of the screen to input your questions, comments, and feedback throughout the presentation and during the Q&A session at the end. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send me a private chat so that I can help you troubleshoot the issue. Now I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panelist, Dr. DeForest Soares, Jr. Dr. Soares is the president of Corporate Community Connections, Inc., and the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. He's also the former New Jersey Secretary of State and the author of the books Say Yes to No Debt, 12 Steps to Financial Freedom, Meditations for Financial Freedom, Volume 1 and 2, and Say Yes When Life Says No. He is the creator of Be Free, a financial freedom movement and used by thousands of churches and organizations across the country. Be Free has been featured by CNN in a 90-minute Black in America documentary entitled Almighty Debt. His work has also been featured in several publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Black Enterprise. Dr. Soares is a current member of the board of directors at Ocwen Financial Corporation, Independence Realty Trust, and Federal Home Loan Bank of New York. He serves as the compensation chair on all three boards. Without further ado, I now turn it over to Dr. Soares and his administrative assistant, Michelle Charles, to kick off the presentation. Dr. Soares?
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for its leadership on not only this specific topic, but through the EnVision Center demonstration project, empowerment strategies that will help people increase the likelihood of being self-sufficient, to Secretary Carson and his team, and to the EnVision Center national team, to BCT Partners. Thank you for allowing us to participate today. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. It's a subject that includes my personal testimony and my burden for people both in my family and my community. So thank you, and thank you for joining us today. Our goals today include convincing you and anyone else who will see this presentation that there's a need for financial literacy, identify challenges for those who would like to spread financial literacy programmatically or just interpersonally, to define the process of choosing and implementing a financial literacy program or strategy, and then to share with you some key resources that are available for financial literacy strategies. So the agenda for this presentation includes the welcome which you've had. We will describe the need for financial literacy on a high-level summary. Want to spend a little time really identifying why it's so hard. You know, if this were easy, everybody would do it, and we wouldn't have the kind of disparities in so many areas that we do. So we want to identify, just based on research and experience, why it's hard and what you're up against if you're really committed to a financial literacy program. And then the process for implementing a financial literacy program, what areas of measurement should be considered, what resources exist, what kinds of partnerships can aid your efforts, and then do as many questions as we can answer during the time we have. As all of you know, financial literacy is equipping people with the information and tools they need to attain financial freedom. Now, I must confess that I was assigned the task and the subject of financial literacy. But based on my own experience, when I was literate, but I was foolish. We generally in our work talk more about financial freedom, financial wellness, because financial literacy is but a small part of what's required to have a financial strategy and to embrace financial behavior that produces very healthy financial outcomes. And so financial literacy should have as a goal the attainment of financial freedom. The need is well documented. This is just a snippet from Investopedia. The second line really spells it out. Financial literacy among adults is declining. 34% of respondents correctly answered 4 of 5 questions posed by FINRA, which is an investment agency on the topic of finance. It's even when it's mandated in school, it's not always enforced, and it's often not mandated in school. And so if we don't have financial literacy in schools, and we don't have it in many of our family settings, we end up living in a more and more complicated financial world with less and less ability to navigate the difficulties and the challenges and to pursue the opportunities of that financial world. So I want to spend some time identifying the challenges we've had. Now, by way of background, I've been working in financial literacy, financial wellness, financial strategy programs for the last 15 years every day. In 2005, I began just a small little group of people, some of whom were students, some were professionals, many were college graduates, some were high school dropouts. And we just started dealing with why it was we didn't have the information we needed to deal with finances. And for 15 years, we've been promoting material, content strategies. And here are the 7 core obstacles that we faced and the 7 general categories of challenges that anyone should take seriously if we are committed to financial literacy as an empowerment tool. Number 1 is mass marketing. Today, unlike ever before, we have constant exposure to sophisticated ads, primarily through technology and media. I recall just about 3 months ago, I looked at a shirt on my phone, and now 3 months later, every time I look for anything on my phone, the shirt shows up. If I'm in church looking for a Bible verse, here comes the shirt. These sophisticated algorithmic marketing and advertising strategies are unprecedented, and one cannot control one's spending as effectively as perhaps one would while being bombarded from the time we are 3 years old by these marketing and advertising strategies. And that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is the challenge of consumerism, where, it was way back, sociologists began talking about conspicuous consumption. We've talked about conspicuous spending, where culturally our society embraces the idea that having more makes you feel better, having more makes you look better, and conspicuous consumption, consumerism, essentially creates a value out of acquiring goods, acquiring services. The more you have, the better you are. That's a cultural norm that permeates our society. That's a challenge. Challenge number 3 is what we call classism. And classism is essentially a fancy way of talking about class discrimination. And when I am the victim of class discrimination, which essentially says that if I'm lower income or lower class, that as a human being, I don't have the same value as someone who is upper income or upper class. And we have systemic realities that are permeating institutions that cause people, because of classism, to do things and behave in ways that would acquire things to mitigate the effects of classism. And so, you know, if my grandmother was lower class and she saw herself as being less than significant because she was lower income, she might have been inclined to buy things that have labels, much like the consumerism philosophy, to compensate for the fact that she was lower class. But fortunately, my grandmother did not define herself based on her possessions, but she defined herself based on her personhood. But classism is a challenge of Western culture and certainly American culture, which leads us to culture. Culture, starting with family and neighborhood, can be a challenge if our values and our habits are learned through family and community life, and our values and our habits within the context of our culture encourage us to have less or discourage us from learning and accumulating wealth, then our culture actually undermines our potential for financial freedom. You speak about culture. You heard Jay introduce me. I am a pastor of a church. When I first started years ago, and a friend of mine found out that I was going to be a minister working in religion, he saw that I was driving a Chevy, and he said to me, "I'm proud that you're going to be a clergyman, but preachers don't drive Chevys." And that was basically an expression of culture. And instead of telling him my Chevy was paid for and that my Chevy was all I could afford, when he said preachers don't drive Chevys, my mind went to the preachers I admired who all drove Cadillacs. And so that cultural identification caused me to trade in my paid-for Chevy and borrow money to buy a brand-new Cadillac, and the monthly payments took up half my check. And although I was broke driving a Cadillac, I felt like a preacher. And that's where my own cultural understanding of what it meant to be a minister undermines the financial decisions that I should have been making that would have been much more rewarding for my future life. Privacy and pride. We have found that when we are helping people understand finances, when we are helping people take control of their spending, when we are helping people identify strategies for increasing their income, when we're helping people negotiate with debtors and creditors, that sometimes people, even in our own families, are too proud or they are just too private to admit what they don't know. And so trying to teach people about finances or even help people develop strategies for their own finances can be difficult because we like to keep that kind of information close to our breast and avoid the kind of embarrassment that we perceive comes along with it. And then finally, credit card and consumer debt. Easy access to credit causes many of us to use credit to support lifestyles that our income just can't afford. In fact, that's how I got involved in this whole mission of financial literacy. My first credit card, I didn't even apply for. They just mailed it to me, and I thought God had done it. I felt blessed. I got this credit card, and I started using the credit card. And before I knew it, I had so many credit cards, and so much had been purchased on credit, I couldn't even make the minimum payments. And I was financing a lifestyle that my salary could not afford, which meant two things. One, I didn't make plans and didn't take steps to increase my income because I had these credit cards. And the second was that I was in such debt that I couldn't handle the responsibilities that I had, and I could not plan properly for my future or even provide for my family, and certainly could not contribute to my community. And as we've traveled to every state in the country and have worked with every size group in our communities with specific emphasis on African Americans and urban communities, we have found these 7 very real and in some instances very formidable challenges And if we're going to be effective with either younger people, older people, middle income, low income, it doesn't matter, our strategies have to take into account that these 7 enemies are waiting on the sidelines, offering to shut us down.
Hey, Dr. Soares, why don't we give the attendees a few minutes here to see if they have any comments and questions regarding these 7 challenges listed here.
I'd love to do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
And we can encourage them to also share from their perspective some of the other challenges that they may have personally experienced or seen their residents and community members experience.
Okay, ready to move on?
Yes.
Did anyone type, is there a chat box? Did anyone type something in the chat box maybe?
Yeah, someone did respond saying that thank you for the invitation to join this webinar, and currently they don't have any questions.
Okay.
So we'll move on. Yep.
Okay, great.
The next slide.
So my assumption is that anyone who would take time on a beautiful afternoon like today to attend this kind of session has a higher degree of interest in financial literacy than others, which means that you're not only interested in this for yourself, but for other people. Again, because we've been doing this now for 15 years, every day, all over the country with different types of groups, we have been able to summarize the process that we suggest to people, the kinds of things to consider if you're going to work hard to bring to even one person. If you have one person, if you have a child who's living at home and you're praying that one day they'll move out on their own, there's a process that we think you should understand, because the elements in this process will help you increase the likelihood of your successful work with your individual or with your group. And the first is to identify the content that you're going to use. You know, in 2005, when I started thinking about how to help my community, how to help my church members, how to help my friends deal with the challenges that they had with finances and how to be more financially literate, we went everywhere. We went to the federal government looking for resources and content. We went to private vendors. We went to the library. And rather than talk about specific resources now, what I'd like to talk about is the characteristics of those resources that have proven to be most effective. One, taking debt elimination seriously. 80 to 90% of the people in this country have some kind of debt. And if you're talking financial literacy that leads towards financial empowerment, financial wellness, financial self-sufficiency, controlling debt, dealing with the reality of existing debt or the plans for future debt should be a part of the content. Understanding interest rates, understanding late fees, creating strategies for debt elimination. The content should be culturally relevant, and that's pretty self-evident. Should be affordable. I did a webinar with some community leaders recently who talked about some of the content that they considered being so expensive that people basically would have to go into debt to figure out how to avoid debt and grow wealth. Teach healthy spending habits. My own experience in my own life was that I thought my chief financial challenge was inadequate income. That's what I thought about my own life. And while it is true that many people work all week long, 1 and 2 jobs, and still have inadequate income to cover basic needs in urban America, the truth is, in my experience, not only was inadequate income an important focus, but how I spent money, where my money went. And that speaks to budgeting, it speaks to tracking, and it speaks to credit, because often what we learn is that we don't track our spending when we're using credit cards the way we would if we were using cash. And so we want content that exposes predatory financial products. We want to teach people the real nitty-gritty of payday loans. Although they're convenient, they're expensive. We want people to understand that alternative financial services like check cashing facilities may be friendly, but they cost you money. So whatever content we use, we've always tried to use content that includes these elements, encourages entry-level investing. When I started investing, you had to have at least $1,000 to invest in certain funds. Today, because of technology and shifts in the financial industry, people can start investing in stock with $5. And we want content that is up to date on those realities. Introducing risk management solutions, that's just a fancy word for insurance. We are passionate about encouraging people to move away from GoFundMe as if it's an insurance company. GoFundMe is a great platform, but it's not an insurance company. And also content that highlights income-generating opportunities. We teach budgeting, we teach saving, but at the end of the day, you do need money. And what I've always tried to do is to balance the challenges that we offer as it relates to the use of existing resources, but also the strategies for increasing income to ensure that we are advancing, that we are growing, and the content that we pick from time to time and region to region and for demographic to demographic, whether it's young people or senior citizens, we want content that has these elements in the content. Before we even get involved in the actual practice, we want to develop the content and identify what content we're going to use. The second step is to define our goals. What are the goals that we're pursuing with the work that we want to do? Often people have great intentions, pure hearts, but either fuzzy or no goals at all. So there are two categories of goals that we train people to consider. Category number one, what are the program goals? How many people constitute success? There are times when we won't be satisfied unless we have 500 people involved. There are other times when 7 people is really our focus, and it depends on the circumstances. We've been to some communities where if you got to the right 7 people, those 7 people have so much influence in a neighborhood that once you reach those 7 people and train those 7 people, it's almost like a train-the-trainer scenario, because if you can help those 7 will reach 50 each. There are other times when the community is finite. We have a senior citizen building with 64 units. And so in that sense, our goal is ultimately to reach all 64 of those residents in our senior citizen facility. And while we may start with 7, the ultimate goal will be for those 7 to reach the other 57. So how many participants, what length of time? And we have a 12-step program that we run, but we also train people to take the 12-step program and break it into 4 parts and make it 3 steps. So you're not inviting people to do something that's going to take them as they perceive it forever, but you may want to take someone's curriculum, someone's program, and break it into bite-sized pieces to increase the likelihood of people signing up who would otherwise not sign up for life. It all depends on the nature of the people you're working with. And then what resource partners will you use to protect yourself from trying to do it all yourself? Later on, we'll talk about who some of those resource partners can be. How many people are you talking about? What length of time are you committing to? And who's going to help you get this done? Those are program goals. Then participant goals, how will you measure success? What behaviors, if any, what behaviors should change as a result of the program? What will you measure in terms of quantifiable outcomes? Sometimes a measurement is just attendance, just a person who's, if you come here every Monday from 7:30 to 8:30, that counts. Have you reduced the number of credit cards that you depend on? Have you begun tracking your spending? In one instance, I know one particular group that we work with felt that people opening their mail was a measurable outcome and represented a degree of success. And I identified with that because when I was spending money and charging everything and had so many bills I couldn't make my minimum payment, I stopped opening my mail. If a letter came from Bank of America, I knew it wasn't a get well card. I just didn't open it because I knew they wanted money. I didn't have the money. And I put the envelope unopened in a shoebox, and I told the shoebox, you hold these envelopes until I'm doing better. And when we do foreclosure prevention with people in neighborhoods, when we have debt counseling services, we find it consistently all over the country. People will come to the session with unopened mail. And the emotional barriers that have to be broken, the psychological issues that have to be resolved, the embarrassment, that can be a major breakthrough. And while it's not technically financial literacy, effective financial literacy seeks to engage at that level. And rather than having lofty goals that include home ownership in 12 weeks, which is not likely to happen, or cutting up 15 credit cards in 12 weeks, which may not be the preferred priority. It's important for the leadership and for the constituents to agree on what would success look like, how to measure success. And often some of the traditional tools for measurement don't go deeply enough into these kinds of measurable outcomes. When we first started, we used NeighborWorks tool and adapted it to our work because NeighborWorks created a tool that was adaptable to measuring not just actions but attitudes. So we always have and suggest and train toward two types of goals: program goals and participant goals. That's the second step. Third step is to execute. You don't want to plan and dream and get materials and not execute. And as I said, you may identify 7 people that are the key influencers and work with those 7 people for the next 6 months. When I was in Dallas, Texas earlier this year, before the virus shut us down, I went to a large church there and trained the leadership, just the leadership. And the idea was to have the leadership go through the whole program. And that would take at least 6 months. But sometimes, depending on your context, it's better to take a longer period of time with your key people and then have those key people, in fact, lead the program. Start small, plan your logistics. And I don't want to insult anybody, but I just had an experience literally today where someone on my own team had planned something and had not considered the possibility that the platform being used could not hold the number of people that had already signed up. So logistics planning, whether it's a room, whether it's a digital platform, whatever it is, plan your logistics to ensure that your goals match your logistics. And then this is strategic. When I talk about aiming for low-hanging fruit, what I'm suggesting is that there are some things people can do, like opening mail. There are some things in a program that you can start with, and we've learned that the quicker we can help people achieve something concrete, quicker we can do that, like debt reduction, like debt resolution, like opening a savings account, like catching up on obligations. The sooner we can do that, the more likely it is that we will retain the person throughout the program. And we will convince people that they really can achieve financial freedom and they can grasp and retain information under the rubric of financial literacy. Low-hanging fruit. What can I achieve quickly? What can I help you identify that brings you quick success? I'll give you a quick story. I was with a group in Tennessee, and while I was there, the leader was on his laptop, and I was really offended because I'm talking to his leadership team, and he's on his computer. He had heard me talk about spending leaks. We have a section in our curriculum where we help people identify spending leaks, and I'm kind of passionate about cable TV because many of us pay for hundreds of stations that we never watch, and they're wasting money. And actually what he was doing on his computer was going to his cable provider, and while I was talking, while we were in session, he literally went from premium cable to basic cable and confessed that he was saving $91 a month. And for him, everything else we said and everything else we suggested made sense. That was low-hanging fruit. He announced it to his small group. He announced it. He's been talking about it ever since. So that was low-hanging fruit when we can help people with something immediate. It has the potential to spur on interest and motivate people to continue along the path that's crafted by a financial literacy program. And then finally, celebrate the victories, no matter how small they are. Celebrate what people do. Celebrate when people have distinguished between needs and wants. Celebrate when someone opens a bank account that they hadn't had before. Celebrate when someone gets a small insurance policy. The celebration, again, we have learned, because this is what I do, what we have learned is that people's celebrations of their own victories attracts other people to our programming. It doesn't matter how influential the leader is. It doesn't matter how charismatic the minister may be. It doesn't matter how beautiful the materials are. When a 24-year-old who graduated from college 2 years ago gets up and says, I paid off all of my student loans, a 34-year-old says, my God, I'm still paying. How did she do that? When a grandmother says, I paid off my car and I'm still driving it and now I'm saving the money. There's another grandmother that says, my God, how did she do that? When someone says, I called my credit card company and they lowered my interest rate and cut it in half. The point is, when people hear people talk victory, and I'm sure you can hear it, I lean towards issues revolving around debt because that's what's strangling us. And until we free up some of our existing money and cut back on spending more than we should, then increasing income, and there are plenty of strategies for increasing income for those who are, but increasing income before we do financial literacy is not advisable because until we can manage and master what we have, increasing it simply exacerbates the pre-existing problems that we had. I lived that way for 13 years. And that's how I became an expert on money, by being broke and being in debt and spending and not tracking my spending and not looking for quality products that are worth what I'm spending, and being addicted to designer items that cost more than non-designer items. So these celebrations, celebrating whatever kind of victory you can help people achieve, will cause a program to be attractive and to retain the participants and grow. All right. Okay. So I just talked about identifying the content, defining the program and personal goals for participants, launching, executing, making it happen, and celebrating victories. And again, the assumption here is that there's at least one person that you'd like to help using quality content with learning financial literacy to achieve financial freedom. And these are the 4 high-level steps that I think you have to consider. So let's pause here.
Yes. Dr. Soares, we have a couple of questions from Stacy.
Wonderful.
Stacy wants to know, has matching incentive programs or rewards programs shown to be successful as influencers for savings or better money management within this framework?
They have. They definitely have. Incentives are good. The challenge we have, Stacy, with incentives is that most people, most programs, most normal people don't have access to the resources to provide incentives. But incentives definitely work, matches work. But listen, go with me to corporate America, where when corporate America calls, what they want is help in convincing their employees to accept the incentives provided through 401k programs. So incentives can be helpful, but incentives alone don't provide sufficient motivation for people who have not addressed some of these other issues that we've identified. But yes, incentives can be very helpful when you have access to them, and you can attach them to a caring environment and to a committed team of leaders that are holistic in their approach to financial freedom. Yes.
And Stacey also had a question from earlier that pertains to the challenges, the 7 challenges we discussed. She wants to know if you have seen difficulty, a lot of difficulty with college students who use credit card to pay for school and books, et cetera, just to stay in school. And if there are any options, besides work and student loans that exist to help them with that type of financial strain.
Yeah, that's a great question because college is so excessively expensive that it's almost inconceivable for the average family and the average college student to imagine going to college without assuming tons of debt. First of all, we have resources. We've worked with resources and resource people, and there are quite a few, who actually teach families how to approach college without excessive debt, and even some without debt at all. We think that resources should be accessed, for instance, to make sure we maximize scholarship opportunities. I separate work from debt. I think the question included work and debt because we do advocate work, and we think we should advocate work as an alternative to debt. The other reality is this, Stacy. Much of the debt is incurred by people who are in 4-year colleges or sending their children to 4-year colleges. And the financial structure is based on an assumption that they're going to finish in 4 years. The truth is, 80% of college graduates take more than 4 years to graduate. And so one strategy for minimizing debt and going to college is to assume on the front end that it's going to take more than 4 years. To assume that you can go to community college for 20% of the cost and graduate from a community college and then go to a 4-year college. But just the conversation is so critical to have because we have, and this is partly cultural, we have this cultural image of you finish high school, you go away to college, 80% of you are not going to finish in 4 years, but you build a financial model as if you are. Then you leave school after 2 years, 1 or 2 years, and you still have the debt. You've been improperly counseled on the front end because student loan debt can't be canceled even in bankruptcy. And your debt continues to accrue and accrue and accrue. Then on the back end, there's very little analysis done to say if I do finish in 4 years and I've studied sociology and I've got $80,000 in debt. What kind of job do I need to pay off $80,000 in debt in how many years? And that's where financial literacy is critical, because to be financially literate, as the experts describe it, it includes understanding how long it takes to pay off a principal amount of money with the established interest rate. And fortunately, the law requires that credit card companies tell you that, but often we ignore the back end of debt and only look at the monthly payments and whether or not we think we can afford them. So the debt question is a very critical question, particularly for a culture that has sold generations the idea that education is an investment and therefore it represents good debt if you borrow to go to school. And then we've got 50 and 60 and 70-year-old people still paying off student loans.
Yeah, and Stacey also had a follow-up comment stating that many of the minority students come to her wanting to start a business, and what they have seen is that these students use business loans to trying to pay off student loan debt and personal debt, and then give up on everything once the amount gets so high, and eventually default on everything.
Right, and that's a huge problem. And then, of course, we also have students that take out student loan debt in excess of what they need for school and then use the excess for either lifestyle or businesses. So it's the inverse of the same problem. And again, that's why I believe any financial literacy strategy has to really deal with the debt issue head on, because you really can pass a financial literacy test. You know, what is compound interest? How do you, what is a money market account? How do you balance a checkbook? You really can be financially literate, but still be in a financial bind. And the debt issue is huge. Book, Stacey, I wrote a book called Say Yes or No Debt. In the book, I talk about payday loans having a 390% interest rate. And my publisher hired a PhD to edit the book. The PhD wrote me back and said, how can a payday loan have an interest rate of 390%? I said, well, if you borrow, for every $100 you borrow, you have to pay a $15 fee. And the PhD said to me, well, $15 is not 390% of 100. I said, well, no, not if you have a year to pay it back. But if you only have 2 weeks to pay back a $100 loan, and it costs you $15, you have to multiply that times 26, because 2 weeks comes 26 times every year, which is an APR of 390%. And this PhD, brilliant guy who edited my book, never knew that.
Let's move on to the next question, posed by Aura. Her question is, how do you recommend we begin/introduce this discussion to youth that may be seeing bad financial habits firsthand from their families? Also, are there tools that you recommend to make sure, the content is age, income, culturally relevant?
Yeah, you search hard. I have some, but my team is continuously working on answering that question. What we've done historically is take the existing images. For instance, LeBron James signed, I think it was $156 million 4-year NBA contract. So what we and other people that do programming like this tend to do is to take LeBron James' contract and break it down to teach financial literacy. When what's the little guy from California? Nipsey Hussle. When Nipsey Hussle died, and he was celebrated by that entire generation, we took Nipsey Hussle's work and the lyrics from his songs to do a financial literacy series using Nipsey Hussle and the children's admiration and attention on him to teach them about home ownership, what it takes to buy the block, what is a mortgage, How do you get a mortgage? And so the truth is, the best materials that we've been able to use with the children that we know best are literally homemade. And if you work with a group of children and you know they love sports, or we know they love Beyonce, or we know they love Offset, you know, Offset has a watch, I think, that costs about $350,000. And they're already watching Offset. And so using the culture to teach the information, I think, is the preferred strategy for young people. You give them a textbook, and I think you're wasting your time, but you give them a 3-minute music video that has had 30 million views, and in that music video, they're in front of somebody else's Maserati. You can at least, the video has their attention, and you know the content. And I think you can at least hold their attention long enough to teach them the content that you know is important. That's the strategy that I have used. I've encouraged others to use. And the best reports that come in from around the country are people who have mastered the art of doing that kind of work.
All right, great. For the sake of time and keeping pace with our webinar, let's go to the next section.
Okay.
And then we'll ask the participants to hold your questions towards the end of the session during the QA. Then we'll have some time for questions and answers. Yeah.
So when I talk about our approach, I thought it would be appropriate, since most of my stories come from my own experience. I thought it'd be appropriate just to give you an example of how the work I do, which is called D3, matches the principles and concepts that I describe. And I don't think we're the only ones, but the work I do provides education, that's financial literacy, motivation, that deals with emotions and psychology, and then support, because this is a deeply communal, cultural kind of work. And if you just, I'm not going to talk about what I do, but when I've made reference to my work and what we train people to do, we do have a program that has those elements that we have proven work. The only thing I didn't put in the presentation that I think Stacy raised, and that is incentives. I did not talk about incentives, but a part of the celebration mode can include incentives. We give people cash prizes if they win competitions on debt reduction. And you can see that our website is on the list of resources, and you can go there and see details surrounding this. But that's how we summarize our work. We call it D3. D3 means free from debt, delinquencies, and deficits, meaning pay as you go, pay your bills on time to avoid late fees, and live below your means. And then freedom 2, make deposits in your own bank accounts, earn dividends from investments, and have your names on deeds when you become an owner. Okay, next line. So these are the results from any effective financial literacy program that we are involved in and that we recommend people look for. Increase and decrease. Increase in confidence, time spent on financial affairs. I'm not going to read this list. You can see it. Donations to charities. If I tell you that what I got from this program is an increase in reading and understanding my bills, then I believe you're headed towards positive outcomes in helping me become financially literate. There should be a decrease in use of credit cards and consumer debt. And again, I repeat, to support a lifestyle that I otherwise can't afford. A decrease, I should be paying less late payment fees. When I changed the way I was living, the first thing I realized was I was paying hundreds of dollars a year in late fees because I was just disorganized. Emotional spending, people make me mad and I go shopping to feel better. And there are tools that can be used to give people a chance to say, this is what I've achieved as a result of going through this program. I'm no longer afraid of financial matters. I now know I can pick up the phone and call the credit card people that have been calling me and tell them, listen, you know what, my friend is paying 6%, you have me paying 9%, I want to pay 6%. So increase and decrease. When you get the presentation, you'll be able to read it point by point. But there ought to be a difference. Again, it's not just in knowledge. Financial literacy implies that I'm now smarter about money, but financial literacy should include being smarter with money and not just smarter about money. Next slide. Trying to get you there, Jay, by the end. All right. So if you're interested or committed in helping a group of people, it could be an existing group, it could be just your children and their friends, it could be a church group, it could be a housing association, if it's the EnVision Center, there are people that will come tomorrow. If you call them this afternoon and say, listen, we have a group of people tomorrow and we'd like them to know about insurance, trust me, some insurance professional, some licensed insurance person will be at your door tomorrow. These financial companies, they are chopping at the bit to get in front of people just to teach them, because the assumption that the financial services industry makes is that if people know better, they'll do better. If they know more, they'll do more. And so banks, credit unions, CDFIs, that's community development, financial institutions, insurance companies, law firms, accounting firms, government agencies, FDIC, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Securities Exchange Commission, there's consumer affairs departments. There are unlimited resources, and what you want to do is form partnerships, because while your passion may be financial literacy, insurance may not be your expertise. Investing may not be your expertise. But for every subject your content covers, there's a partner, there's an agency, there's a company, there's an individual who has the expertise, and they will come for free. In fact, some of them will pay you to let them come to teach that section of your program. And I urge everyone to form partnerships. And I think this is the last page, but these are resources. This first, myd3.org, that's the website for my foundation. And then you have mint.com, which is financial management, IRS, which is the IRS. GreenPath is one of our partners that we use to help people restructure their debt and get the debt collectors off their backs, a nonprofit, FDIC, of course. Credit Karma is good for people who are trying to get started understanding their own finances. Of course, you have the credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. FinancialEducatorsCouncil.org is a good resource for people who are teaching financial education. I think that's it, right, Jay? Yeah,
Yep.
We have 4 minutes.
We're right at the point for a Q&A. I actually do have a question from Regina Williams. She's wondering if you have any strategies to change the mindset of residents to save their money from a tax refund and invest that into saving bonds, or invest that into saving bonds.
Well, I think, thank you, Regina. That's a great question. And the operative word is mindset. That's the operative word, because it's not just it's not just one group of people. You know, there's a whole industry that gives people their tax return early for a big chunk of it, big industry. And so the mindset has to be to use your money to work for you instead of constantly having to chase money and work for it. And what I've discovered, the strategy that works best for us is when people take 30 days and actually write down where their money goes. I'm spending $5 a day on Starbucks. And then at the end of a whole month, I say I've spent over $100 on Starbucks. That's $100. If you just went from Starbucks to Dunkin' Donuts, you could save 60%. And when people start really looking in detail about what they're doing with the money they have, money takes on a whole different meaning. And then a tax refund of $200 or $400, whatever the tax refund is, takes on a different meaning. And then when you get to the point where you can show people what money can do, one share of Zoom, we've been Zooming all year now, but not enough of us bought stock in Zoom. One share of Zoom in March would be worth 4 times as much today. So I think it's showing people where their money is going now, their existing money, and how that same money could be used to accomplish different things in their lives. I'm about to do that with a young man today who has $2,000 in cash in a shoebox, and I want to show him some of the options. It's not my job to tell him what to do, but it is my job to show him his options. And hopefully the option will be so attractive that he'll change his mentality.
Thank you. We have another question from Stacy. Do you recommend designing age-based savings program as we look into young folks having issues with student loans or lifestyle, but seniors may have more issues with casino spendings, which they believe they do not lose money, but is actually a social event or a bus ride to the casino? They're totally two different audiences. And what are your thoughts on the most effective model of training when it comes to, these two different age groups?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Financial literacy for a 17-year-old is completely different than the financial literacy for a 70-year-old. In one sense, there's core knowledge you want everyone to have. But the 70-year-old is the focus of scams. The 70-year-old, as you say, is allured by gambling. The 70-year-old, is just a target different than the 17-year-old. And you do have to have demographic-specific content. We've taken our core content and we have 2 different curricula, one for young adults and one for senior citizens. We have one we also have one that's digitally based with videos. Like I said, the Nipsey Hussle video series was not for my senior citizens. When I said Nipsey Hussle, they thought I was talking about Nipsey Russell, and they were trying to figure out what does Nipsey Russell have to do with money. So that's exactly right, because when you think about culture today, the truth is teenagers today are as different from senior citizens today in many ways as black people are from white people. They have a different culture. So culture is not only ethnic culture, but culture can be generational culture. And to be culturally specific means that exactly that. It's got to be relevant for the culture of the people that you're addressing. I had a FaceTime call with a 5-year-old last week who called me to show me her drone. She got a drone flying all over the house in Chicago, and of course, I feel like I've lost my mind watching a 5-year-old with a drone inside. All right, I'm sorry I went over time, but it's hard to condense 15 years of work into 55 minutes of talk for people who are really committed to making a change. So thank you.
Yeah, let's give the attendees a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions that they can pose at this moment, and then I'll do a quick next steps to let everybody know what to look forward to. So everybody, if you still have any last minute comments or you're finishing typing in the chat box, take your time. We'll wait for you. to raise your last question. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. We'll send out a follow-up email that contains a PDF copy of the slide deck and fact sheets for today's presentation. Additionally, the email will capture questions posed and answers provided during the live delivery. We encourage you to reply to the email message if you need further clarification on what was covered today or have additional questions or comments. Thank you again, and this will conclude today's webinar session. We look forward to seeing you at the next session where we will cover the topic of senior population. Thank you very much to everybody. Have a great day.